This is BBC Radio
6 Music.
Legends of the dance floor. A piece of paradise. Larry Levan story.
Whatever happened to the day we met on King Street? All we ever wanted to do is sing and dance. Hey, yeah, maybe we could go back there and look for King Street. But sad as it may be, people, we never got the chance. Oh, whatever happened to the days we met on King Street?
Eddie Gordon and myself, Lenny Fontana, would like to welcome you to Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise. Tonight's show is The Two Towers with Larry Levan and Frankie Crocker, showing that they own New York City. We have 9 interviews from the movers and shakers of Manhattan during those halcyon days from the 70s through today. So now, let's go to Brooklyn's own Dan Pucciarelli for his story.
I am Dan Pucciarelli. Most people know me as Danny Pooch, and I am one of the last of my kind. I am still a vinyl DJ, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm the second best DJ there ever was. Every place you went, everybody had a club. Everybody was a DJ. Every restaurant put in a DJ. Every catering hall had a Saturday night dance fever thing. So we were being overwhelmed. And the music started flooding. Everybody had a disco record. And I'm telling you, as a Billboard DJ, and I'm not exaggerating, I mean no exaggeration whatsoever, I would get between 60 and 80 records a week in the mail. Plus I had the record pool, and I was getting 100 records a week in the record pool. The Rolling Stones made a disco record, Kiss made a disco record, Ethel Merman made a disco record, Shirley Bassey made a disco record, Frank Sinatra made disco records. They actually took their own songs and just gave them...
And Johnny Mathis.
And Johnny Mathis with the Begin to Begin. Just flooding us with so much stuff that it became difficult to even find records to play at times. Anyway, in 72, I was home on leave, and a couple of friends of mine took me to Revelations on 4th Avenue. And Bacho Mangual was the DJ. And this is June 72. And Soul Makossa was the hottest record in the world. And I just watched Bacho play. And Bacho's enthusiasm and his reverence for the crowd and song after song and pounding and pounding. I thought it was fantastic. It was the most fantastic experience. So my whole weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, I was at Revelations. Monday I went back to base. I tried to get a weekend pass to come back the next week because I was so excited. I wanted to go back, but I couldn't. So it wasn't until the summer when I got to come back home on a leave where I got to see Revelation and Bacho again. Bacho was my inspiration. After I got discharged in the Marine Corps in 73, I became friends with Bacho. We were known. I took my sister's turntables, my sister's stereo unit, and my stereo unit. There was those old 8-track stereo units with the turntable and the 8-track built in. And I was going back and forth, and that's how I was learning to play and whatnot. People were searching for new things. Fashion was new. The bell bottoms were new. The platform shoes were new. The bouffant hairdos were new. People were superstars. Girls were dressed all the time in their high-heeled platforms and their dresses and their hairdos and their makeup. It was the Farrah Fawcett time. Since Nam had ended and there was this new freedom about, people were looking for their new release. The new release was the club scene. My thing was, the way I've interpreted mixing or blending back in the day is that when you put 2 songs together, when you took a record like The Glow of Love and Can't Fake the Feeling, when you put the 2 of them together, they create a 3rd song that you're only going to hear that one time and you can't buy. That's it. You're hearing 3 songs right now. The Glow of Love, Can't Fake the Feeling, but the 2 of them together created its own song in and of itself. So for that 35 seconds that that record was mixing, there was a whole nother song. Galaxy.
You see, when you came into my life.
Galaxy.
Tell us about that.
Galaxy 21 sound system. Now they weren't big, huge bins, but the dance floor, the club in and of itself was long. It was very long. It was maybe only 30 feet wide, but like 70 or 80 feet long in this primary dance area. And it was benched on both sides. And underneath your seating was the bass bins. And each side was lined with them. And then there were full-range cabinets. And then these things hanging, which later on I found out were tweeters, piezo things. It was still unknown to me at the time. And there was a DJ in there, this skinny little white guy. I didn't get to meet him. I found out later who it was. And later on in life, I got to meet him as I became a popular DJ. He was cranky. That place, the sound system was surrounding you. There was no place to avoid it once you walked in that room. You could not speak. You'd have to yell to talk to someone. It wasn't annoying loud. It was finely tuned. He did things with the sound system. I remember trying to be by the booth and watch what was going on because I had an interest in it. And this has got to be 74. Turning knobs and the bass went off and then this went on and the bass came back on and that went off. And I don't know, later on I'm thinking he had a crossover at the time, but it wasn't a common piece of equipment at the time. The music just was exhilarating. So I'd have to say, if I have a flashback of clubs that turned me on, I'd have to say that Les Jardins was one of them, and I'd have to go with Galaxy. The greatest creator of effects to me in the disco was Larry Levan. There was nobody, and I mean nobody, could work the sound system. The first time I heard things being done was Walter Gibbons in Galaxy, maybe even early 76. He was doing little things. And then he had this echo stuff, which after I met him and spoke to him and whatnot, and I was hanging out by the booth, I seen what he did. He had a reel-to-reel on, and he was recording. And then what he would do was raise the volume to play back, and he'd raise the volume on the mixer. So now you heard the echo, or reverb, so to speak, and it was being created through the reel-to-reel. So the reel-to-reel was recording and playing at the same time. So now you're having this kind of echo, which I thought was a really cool effect. But when you go talk about somebody that can control the sound system, it completely changed the sound of a song, not the context of it, like I was creating remixes, but the sound of a song, that would be Larry Levan. He had this big crossover, and he would pull out the bass, and raise the tweets, and drop the mid-range, and then bring in the bass, and then drop the tweets, and put up the mid-range, and it completely changed the song. So, I mean, take a song like Got My Mind Made Up by Instafunk.
You can get it.
The first night that he played it, I just happened to be there that night with Judy Wine. He played that, and I went nuts. I had to have that song. I was going to kill somebody to have that record. I had to have it. It's the first time I met Frankie Crocker, okay, in the DJ booth. I'm like, Larry, he had the right knack to pull the bass out at the right time, raise the mid-range at the right time, pull the tweeters at the right time, bring the bass back in, bring those piezo, bring the bullet tweeters back up. And the sound system at the garage was beyond the world. It was the best sound system I had ever heard, best sound system I'd ever seen. The clarity and the definition. And these speakers, when you stood next to the speaker, the top of the speaker was here at your nose. This was called a Bertha, and Richard Long built the sound system. So you had these big, huge bass bins, and there was, I think, pretty sure there was 10, I remember counting. 5 on each side, on the 2 corner bass, and then these full-range cabinets, and then this whole unique thing, a chain coming down out of the ceiling, and on it were these green, looked like missiles, and later on I understood that they were called bullet tweeters, and it was a whole new sound to me. It was a whole new effect. I mean, seeing how people reacted to the way he did things. He could drop the bass out of a song, and people would go, woo, and all you'd hear was this, and all of a sudden you hear, and you could be in the middle of the dance floor, 30 feet away from the bass bins, and you would feel it. He'd go, boom, boom, and you'd feel that pounding in your chest. And then all of a sudden he'd drop the tweeters out, and then boom, 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 and that boom, and it was just like, oh, your nipples got hard, and you're like, yeah, do it to me. You couldn't decide whether to be in the booth or on the dance floor. I can sum up the garage. The Paradise Garage, it had the stickiest dance floor in the world. It smelled like a pigsty. It had that slime, gritty, gooey atmosphere. It was greasy and dingy and grungy and disgusting, and it was the best place in the world to go and dance and hang out.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise.
Larry Levan story.
This interview is being conducted by Eddie Gordon. He interviews Curtis Stevens, an award-winning New York-based journalist who's wrote a biography about Frankie Crocker. Curtis will explain Frankie Crocker's moment in the Paradise Garage and what WBLS did with making records cross from the street into the club and from the club onto the radio airwaves. And he will tell his story. His story.
Well, in your research, did you do anything that came up with Frankie's relationship with the garage?
Oh, absolutely. The garage and Frankie really intersect in that second era of Frankie, which is 1979 to 84. Again, there's a lot of different eras with Frankie. He's off the air in New York between 77 and 78. So he comes back famously. The party, December of 1978, he comes on the famous White Horse, enters into Studio 54. It's just an amazing moment in radio history. So he comes back January of 1979 officially as program director at WBLS. And it's a great sensation. Everyone wants to see what he's going to do. There's enormous excitement. Frankie's excited about it. And there's Paradise Garage. Disco, as it's popularly known, right? Because discotheques did not start in the 70s. It goes back much further than that. So by that point, the music goes back underground. Dance music goes back from whence it came. It evolved from the underground and it goes right back there. And obviously he's a club rat, so he hits the clubs, among them Paradise Garage, Larry Levan's famous booth, sight unseen. But Frankie could, he didn't have to phone in advance to let him know he was coming. Very much a sort of an informal relationship that they would have up there. And I'd often ask about how Frankie and Larry would interact during the course of Larry holding court as he's playing records in Paradise Garage. You know, Frankie would sort of ask, what are you playing? You know, Larry would tell him. And there was sort of a love-hate relationship as well with Frankie and the Paradise Garage because, again, Paradise Garage is underground. You know, you couldn't just walk in and go party, you know. But Frankie would sometimes mention Paradise Garage on air, and the owner, Michael Brody, did not particularly like that. Which sort of led at one point to Frankie being banned from Paradise Garage at one point. But all that said, for the most part, Frankie is able to exploit Paradise Garage for great benefit. Both ways, obviously, because there's a point where discos are making the hits, but then there's a point where radio is making the hits. The merging of those two worlds together was just magic between Larry and Frankie. And you had to, I mean, this is where Frankie for the first time would be exposed to Madonna, for example. I mean, you think about that period between 1982, 83, and all of these dance records, again, all underground, are coming back there. And Frankie's able to do his tastemaking. I mean, look, you talk about a club as a place where people go out to hang out, party, score for the night. It's also a workplace. For Larry, it was a working environment. It was a sanctuary. It was his passion. It was his pleasure, his joy. And Frankie went to the clubs to work. I mean, he came in, I know he came in with an entourage very oftentimes. He head straight up to Larry's booth, but he was paying attention to what was the next thing. Frankie could hear a record in Larry Levan's booth and play it, and then the next day, 4 o'clock, there it is. And Frankie knew how to build it up. But he had that power, again, to do that. Again, you're talking about the #1 disc jockey, the #1 station, and the #1 market.
Mates, if you live as long as you want, never want as long as you live. Mates, if you live to be 100 and me 100 but minus a day, so I'll never know that nice people like you've passed away. And don't forget, whenever Frankie Crocker isn't on your radio just isn't really on. Peace. Have a good weekend. We'll check you out on Monday.
Bye-bye, honey.
There I go, there I go, there I go, there I go. Pretty baby, you are the soul who snaps my control. Such a funny thing, but every time you're near me, I never can behave. You give me a smile.
Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise.
Eddie Gordon and myself, Lenny Fontana, took a trip into Manhattan and visited with Diane Strafasi, nicknamed Foxy by Frankie Crocker, and a first-generation club goer. She will give you her account of Larry Levan, Frankie Crocker, Keith Haring, and all the magic that went on in the club. So here is her story.
When I arrived, we were walking up a ramp, and I'm like, where are you taking me? And then all of a sudden I hear boom, boom, and I'm like, I got nervous for a minute, and I said, Bobby, what's going on here? And he said, wait till we walk through the club. And at that time, it was under construction, there was sawdust on the floor, and he brought me over, and he introduced me to Larry, and from that moment, there was a connection. I can't explain it. It was just something that we connected right away. And every weekend, I started going there. It was like going to church for me. Rain, snow. A friend of mine, Julie, she was married also, and they were loft. They used to go to the loft. So I turned her on to the garage, and I went there every weekend. The only time I would miss going is if I was on holiday, if I went away with my husband. And I found I would have the anxiety starting by Tuesday what I was going to wear, because Larry loved fashion and I was in fashion. And I cost him, or Mike Brody, more money of turning him on to Elsa Peretti and Susan Dennis Warren shoes. And I used to look forward to go there and have this talk with him, because the crowd would be so intense dancing and high and partying that Larry would look at me and say, where'd you get those shoes? And the belts. And before you know it, I started getting into this whole other thing with him. He would have 1,500 people tripping out, and he'd go downstairs with a ladder, have one of the guys get a ladder and put it in the middle of the dance floor, climb up on it and start fixing lights. And I used to stand up there and say to my girlfriend Julie, look at this nut job. The garage was incredible because you never had to have a lover, a boyfriend. You'd always meet one there, but you could go out alone and go on the dance floor and you'd be dancing with 40 people. And Larry, there was a very sensitive side of him. He was lonely. There was a side of him after his work. He would have 10, 15 people when he was living in the garage space. He'd have people stay, and he'd go to Jefferson Meat Market and spend $300-400 on food. And I used to yell at him and say, why are you doing that? He needed that. He needed people to be around him. Not to show off, just to have that security.
Diane, why did you think he felt that way?
I think it had to do with his childhood, being raised, and he had a thing with his mom. I mean, he loved his mother. And then Mike Brody became, I don't know if people are talking about Mike Brody, but he was a very special man. At first, he couldn't stand me and my girlfriend. He really didn't like women at one time in his life. And then I became very close with him, and he loved Larry. And Larry abused him because he spoiled him. And I remember the day when Michael told them, I was at the club that weekend when he had a staff meeting that he was closing the club. And when Larry came out of the office, I mean, it was like crazy. And that's when he wasn't himself anymore. And that's when he started picking up. And I used to try to talk to him about those moments. And I saw when he would go to Studio 54 for a night out. And he had to play once he didn't show up. Then I would run into him. The phone calls weren't around like they used to be. That was very disturbing for me. And when Michael got sick, I was at his house. I spent a week out in Fire Island. He was telling me, that he wasn't feeling well, and then he told me about. It was just very heartbreaking. And at that moment, I didn't know how to handle things, because my life was going to be over with my friends every weekend. Being a part of the garage, I would go on a Friday night and call up Frankie on a Sunday and give him a list of records, and Larry was never threatened by that. He knew I did that, where other DJs used to get mad if I did that. And he would go on every record that I would give him. Larry would come up there sometimes with me. I mean, I made some records #1 hit. I used to go to the loft. They were like geniuses. They made you come back. You wanted to go. You wanted to have your outfit ready. And then there were times he'd leave the club and not come back till 6 in the morning. And the minute he touched that turntable, a whole other sound came out. But Larry did something with the turntable. People would bring records. And this goes back to him not being afraid. Where there were 1,500 people on a dance floor, he would take the record and put it on. Where another DJ would take it home or listen to it first. And if he didn't like it, he didn't take it off. He respected that person that gave him the record, and he was able to mix it around where it was fine. I met Frankie way back in a club called Nepenthe and Arthur. And I used to look at him and say, oh my God, this man is like his charisma, his aura was so strong. And then he came to the garage one night, and then we all became friends with him. And Frankie was another kind person. When Frankie Crocker walked in, Larry would stop whatever record was on, and he used to put Ain't No Stoppin' Us Now. And you knew that Frankie, when he walked through that dance floor, it was like, I get goosebumps thinking about it, because it was just an incredible moment of him walking up the steps and Larry like all excited. The music would really start jamming because he wanted to play for him, and Frankie would sit there. He would always come with 3, 4, 5 women. Monday, through the garage, BLS became like a novella. You turned it on because he would talk about the garage from the weekend. Oh, I was in the garage, Larry Levan, Foxy, and Judy Weinstein. He would, talk about everything that he did in the booth. And then people started picking up that radio station really became #1. And the garage did have a lot to do with it, from the music and also from the stories. I used to love 8 o'clock to hear him say, there I go, and then a lot of times I would go up there and watch him do his thing up there. So Michael had all these things that were happening come to his club. He never ripped you off. I think it was $10 to get in with a membership, and he gave you $10 worth. There was a great kitchen with food. He had a room where they showed movies.
Diane, can you explain what a night was like at the garage?
The security was great. They were the hottest guys in New York City, okay? Hot men. And they were good security people. You never really saw any fights outside that door. Keith painted the club. He painted Grace Jones one night. It was incredible. He just loved the garage. And he would be there every weekend also, Keith Haring. And I became also close with Keith. I was never really part of his posse, but we had a nice relationship because everyone had their own little, tribe.
Can you tell us how the logo was designed and who came up with the idea?
Dennis was the manager there, and Dennis had met Willie in a club and took him to meet Mike Brody. Michael hired him as security, that he used his arm and made the logo.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise.
In the late 70s and early 80s, John Morales from Eminem used to be a WBLS master mixer. He then turned out to be one of the biggest remixers of that time. He was responsible for making the connection with Frankie Crocker with a record that was played by Larry Levan at the garage called I'm Caught Up in One Night Love Affair on Prelude Records. Now, let's hear his story.
Then you figure Larry had his own crowd to kind of play to his own drummer. I mean, Sergio more than me was the guy that really went out to all the clubs. So I kind of had this philosophy that I spent 20 hours in the studio mixing the record. The best thing I needed to do is spend another 10 hours in the club listening to it, So, I mean, most of the mixes I would end up doing the bulk of the work. Sergio would come by and say, oh, it sounds great. Let me take it here or take it there. And I went there a lot when Jocelyn would perform there.
Right.
Because I did a lot of Jocelyn's early records, and I'd be the one bringing the tapes around for her to, do the tracks, whether it was 54 or Rise, Saint, or one of those clubs. She always had such a really huge gay following, So the thing between the garage, Frank used to go there a lot to get an idea of what Larry was playing, see how he can apply some of it, so he can bring it to the mainstream, where a lot of the other stations were very self-contained. It wouldn't go out of the box. You know, so if it was a pop record, you know, that someone did, they'd automatically put it on. Frankie go down and he'd find a Peach Boys track and come back, he'd get the record and he'd start banging it on the radio station. He had already set the precedent for getting club DJs to come in and have this Friday night dance party, which is what it was. It was from 11 to 3, you know, where they would dedicate just to, you know, to dance and the club music. And Frankie would in turn take some of those tracks and he'd play them during the day and put them into rotation. You know, that's why he became such a big figure, because the labels were not only promoting their big act, but now you had the small labels like West End, Prism, and some of those that actually had a place that they could take their stuff to where it actually had a chance to get played, you know, as opposed to saying, all right, we'll just leave them over there, you know, we'll take a look at them. Frankie would see people and he'd listen to it, and if he liked it, he would play it. Well, that's how I started I was always into music. When I was like in 7th and 8th grade in school, there was a record shop. Never forget this. There was a record shop in the Bronx on 3rd Avenue and 156th Street called Stan. And I would go in there like every day after school. They had these bins on the wall where they put all the 45s. So whatever the top 50 was, it'd have a slot. Like 2 little turntables with controls in the back so you can listen to what it was. And if you want it, I forget, they were like 49 cents. So I go in there every single day and just listen to the music, you know. And one day the guy that worked there, he said, "Hey kid, you want a job?" You know, and I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" He says, "Yeah, just do me a favor." He says, "I'll give you 10 records a week on Friday. Just come in here every day after school, make sure nobody steals anything." I used to go like every day after school. I'd sit like in the back of the store and I'd watch all 45s, make sure the kids that came after school, because there was a couple of schools in the area that didn't steal anything. And then Friday I could take 10 records out of top 100. You know, so I went from Stan's record shop to my father and his brother buying a bar in Jersey City. You know, people were cheap and they want to put money in the jukebox. The bar could put its own quarters in the jukebox, and they used to paint them with nail polish red. So when the guy used to come to empty the box out, all the red quarters would go back to the owner. So what happened was, after a while, the guys that would fill on jukebox said, "You guys ain't making any money. You know, it's not worth it for me to come here." So my father said, "With your little turntable, and just play some records." I was like, "All right, cool." Yeah, I didn't know what it was. I go down there with my 45s, and one of those little box players. You stack the like a Zenith or something. You stack the 45s on it and click, and they drop, and you play them. So then I started asking around to some of the club owners, you know, if they need a DJ, and they said, "Well, if you want to come play records, you can, but we're not paying anybody to do it." So I started doing that at like some of the local bars and stuff. Whenever you play at a bar, usually it's the backdrop to what's really going on, which is selling liquor. So like a lot of times if too many people would dance in the club owner say, "Yo, play something slow," you know, because you want people to come back to the bar. And then I started to stumble on the fact that the records that I was playing were too short. The first record that I really had a problem with was Eddie Kendrick's "Stay With the Rain." I used to love that track. It was like 2 minutes. I was like, there's got to be a better way than this, you know? So, and I was always into electronics and stuff. So I bought a little Sony reel-to-reel and record, and I started doing my own little edits and stuff, you know. I was using Scotch tape, and I did my first little plate. Went in the phone book, found Sunshine Sound, went there and got it pressed. Like that was like 78. Now I was coming into the city, and I was meeting like other DJs like Pinky Velasquez, and was going up to CZ Sanchez and Norman over at Fantasy and stuff. So now I became part of a little crew that every Tuesday would make the rounds with all the record companies for promo. And in doing that, I just started taking my editing to the next level. You know, doing all the plates, and then I became popular with all the DJs because I made a deal with Sunshine where they would sell my plates, and I would make $1 on every one he sold. You know, one day the guy that works there, Frank, saw Patrick Adams, Greg Carmichael, said, "You know what, there's this guy that's doing all the hot plates for the DJs, you know?" They said, "You should get him to one of your records." So one day I'm up there getting something pressed up, because when I started making money at it, then I really started to do it. I was actually editing records that I probably shouldn't have. And I was just doing them just like to make that buck. So one day I get in there and Frank says, "Oh, hey, we're going out to the 11th floor, 1101, Greg Records. Talk to Greg. I told him about you." I went downstairs, and Greg in his little Jamaican accent, "Frank said you a good mixer." He says, "You want to mix a record?" I said, "Yeah." He says, Saturday night He gave me the address. He says, NOLA Recording Studio, 57th Street, Penthouse. Come at 2 o'clock in the morning. I was like, 2 o'clock in the morning? He says, yeah, because it's a late session. So what happened was that Greg and Patrick used to hire the studio on off hours, where they would get a cheaper rate, because usually during the day was when everybody would record. And I walk up to the studio, and I walk up, get upstairs, go in the elevator, I walk in the studio, and the first thing I see is Jocelyn Brown singing. And at the time, I didn't know what was going on. An hour later, I find out that the track's name was caught up in a one-night love affair. So I'm saying, all right, that's cool. So I sat in the session, this old engineer, and gave him my ideas for what I wanted and stuff. So we put it together. Jocelyn walks out. She says there was a certain part in the record, kind of broke a note. Says, John Morales, don't you use that in the record, right? And I was like, okay, no problem. And as soon as she left, I was doing the mix. There was no way for me to get it out because it was so exciting. Because there's a point in the middle, she goes, I'm caught up. And then it breaks down from there. So she didn't want that in the record, but I left it in there. And then I became friends with Greg because he lived in the Bronx. His mother's on Paulding Avenue. With that record, we drove to a pressing plant in Jersey. We'd get them pressed up 50 at a time, drive them back in the city and go to all the record shops and sell it out of the trunk of his car. Then they sold the record to Prelude, and Frankie was playing. And that's coming back to Frankie. Frankie was the one that broke the record. I had given Larry a version. It's a little different than the original. It's got a little more percussion. The breakdowns are a little different. And from there, wherever they went, I went. The music stuff, I was there for all that stuff. Helped record, mixed, did some of the original mixes, did all the stuff in South Soul.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise.
Eddie Gordon takes a trip in to visit Ramon Wells, who's part of the Grammys nomination panel for dance category. Ramon takes time to give you his account of what records were popular at the Paradise Garage and what Paradise Garage did to Ramon Wells. Let's go to his story.
My name is Ramon Wells. I have been in the dance music world since 1971. I was very influenced by Paradise Garage and Larry Levan. I started going to the garage in the early 80s. And although I lived in Seattle, Larry Levan influenced my DJ skills and my choice of music. Some of the records that I recall Larry Levan playing for us was Tom Tom Club, Blondie Rapture, Lolita Holloway I saw perform. I have a couple of experiences with the club itself that were very unusual. I remember the time when they put in the surround sound and one of the speakers was just off kilter a little bit. So in the middle of the dance floor, Larry had someone bring out a ladder and get up and change the speaker and change a couple of the lights onto the dance floor so that he got the effect and the sound that he wanted on the dance floor. And so they moved the speaker, and it was the first time that any of us had heard music go all the way around, pan around the room. The Paradise Garage was just an amazing place, and when they renovated it and they did the rooftop garden, everybody would hang out up there and they'd go downstairs and they'd dance their asses off. In the early 80s, it was considered like the end of the disco era, because there was this big uproar about disco and how horrible it was. And in fact, what it was that it was the end of pop disco. And it was the beginning of disco going back underground. And it was also the introduction of the new Romantics period, which was the British invasion and the synth pop movement that was coming in from Europe. And the two of them merged and formed all kinds of mixed breeds of music, including the soulful house of today was first started like back in those days when they were adding beats and electronic music to soul music and bringing it all together. And as I was telling you earlier, the 80s was a very tough time for R&B artists because R&B artists weren't getting booked, and so they started doing songs for disco music, which eventually evolved into house music because you had soulful singers singing over electronic beats versus over bands.
Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise. Larry Levan story.
The next interview is from Michael Pauletto, former Billboard dance editor and a much-loved personality around the US music business. Michael tells us of how he was inspired to move to Manhattan, New York from hometown Cleveland, Ohio, because of the Paradise Garage.
So let's go to his story.
It was never about beat mixing per se for Larry. It was about knowing what song to play after the song he was currently playing. That's how I always saw it. And he was a master at knowing what song should come next. For him, it wasn't about the DJ being this master crafter beat mixer. It was more important to tell a story with the music and knowing what to play next. And in that, he was always challenging people's perceptions of what should and should not be played in a club or discotheque. Many DJs were known for a sound. Larry's sound was gospel, new wave, pop, rock, disco, funk, and anything else he deemed worthy to hear and play on a dance floor. Period. I mean, for those that don't know, it was in a garage. It was, I believe the building was owned by Bell Communications, I believe, if I recall correctly. And so it was an old garage in a garage type warehouse on King Street. And you'd be outside of the building and you would already hear the rumblings of the bass on the second floor. So you'd walk in, you'd show your membership card, you'd walk in. I'll never forget the feeling of walking up the ramp to the second floor. And the ramp is what a car or a truck would have driven up to park on the second floor. So you're walking up this ramp and there were blinking lights going, along the sides, up and down the ramp. And you'd get to the top, you'd show your membership card, you'd pay to get in, and the music and bass were just getting louder and louder the closer you arrived onto that second floor landing. And then you would turn right, that was coat check, and then right was the dance floor. It was just such an excitement, a glorious feeling every time you walked in. It was an excitement that I've never felt in another club. And once you were on the dance floor, there was just this kind of communal spirit where everybody was on the same page, on the same beat. Larry would just play to each of us. There were certain songs where I felt then, and I still believe, that he knew he was playing it for that group of people on that part of the dance floor because he knew it would really set them off. I always whenever I think of the garage, I think of 4 women, and those are Grace Jones, Gwen Guthrie, Lita Holloway, and Jocelyn Brown. I hear any song by them, and I am transported to the garage. I can hear Ain't No Mountain High Enough by Inner Life with Jocelyn Brown, and I think garage, 5:30 a.m. Sunday morning. And just that the beginning of that song, that 2-minute beginning with that little light piano synth line, and you just scream. I can hear really any Grace Jones song because I saw her perform there live so many times. But I think of her, I see her costume in my head, and I see her coming out on that Paradise Garage stage at 6 a.m., 6:38, Sunday morning. Showtime was scheduled at 4 a.m., and with Grace, you just never expected her before 6 a.m. Love Is the Message, probably the garage song of all time. I can't hear that song without thinking of Larry and the garage. The Clark Sisters, You Brought the Sunshine, Cheryl Lynn, Star Love, Pat Bennett's Our Love is a Battlefield, Yoko Ono, Walking on Thin Ice, The Clash, Magnificent Dance. You can think of all these songs that in a way have nothing in common, and they weren't straight up disco songs. But Larry would play Love is a Battlefield, and that dance floor would go crazy. And if you say to somebody, Pat Bennett, Our Love is a Battlefield, they would think, well, that's not a disco record, that's not a club record, but Larry made it a song to be heard at the Paradise Garage. Stevie Nicks, Stand Back, another song that became a garage standard. So, did the garage have a sound? Yeah, the sound was all-encompassing. If Larry deemed it worthwhile for that crowd, it was not discriminating against any skin color, any sexual preference, or any sexuality. It was one of those clubs where it didn't matter who you were. It really didn't. It didn't matter if you were a celebrity or not. It mattered that you were there for really the sole purpose of dancing and being there for the music. Because at the end of the night or morning or day, it was always about the music. Yeah, the garage did have an effect on breaking down that barrier in that it managed to effortlessly bring people together. There was no agenda there. There was no goal other than the music. You know, in Larry's world, music really was the answer. That was it. And we would be there Saturday night, Sunday morning, reveling in this. The garage was open to all. That said, you know, you had to pass the membership criteria, and I forget what that was, to be honest with you. You had to fill out a form, and you had to meet with Michael Brody and his team once a year to get it renewed or to get a brand new membership. But, you know, that said, Friday nights were predominantly straight, Saturday nights were predominantly gay, although there was some mixing of the two. Because people were going out and they were experimenting with many things they might not have been experimenting with before, whether it be drugs or a new sexual attitude or a new sexual freedom. And then again in a few years that would change again because of with the arrival of HIV and AIDS. When the garage was born in the mid to late 70s, there was just an excitement and a wanting to express yourself and this desire to be who you are and to kind of run with the newfound strength that a lot of gays and lesbians were having at that time. And they just ran with that. I first went to the garage, it was 4th of July weekend in 1980. I was here with two friends from Ohio, but I was told I needed to go there because it was me, that I would get the music. When I was in Ohio, I was ordering records from Downstairs Records every week, and I would read through the pages of Billboard magazine to see which disco records, and this is really mid to late 70s, probably when Tom Moulton was writing the column. And I would go through and I would read religiously every week which disco records each DJ was playing that I would call downstairs and place an order. And maybe somebody there said, oh, you're ever in New York, you know, by what you like, you should really go there. Forget going there on a Saturday night, and we got there so early, too early. Nobody said get there at 2 a.m. I remember saying to my friend, there's no one here. This is nothing. Nothing's going on here. So then, 2 hours later, it was packed. And it was the first place I heard, was it Change Searchin' or Lover's Holiday? I forget, something by Change. It was just glorious. And I knew I had found my space. When they had that year's membership application process, I got in line, filled out the application, had my little interview, and got my membership card. At the time, Larry would introduce and debut many records to the garage dance floor. He was in a position, by way of introducing these records, to influence what was then played and heard on New York radio stations like WBLS. He had WBLS's main host, DJ Frankie Crocker, would be at the garage every weekend. He would watch and listen to what Larry was playing and see the crowd reaction, and that following Monday, you would hear it on WBLS. So when Larry would introduce a record, he was in a way breaking a record in that he was making its presence known, paving the way for it to then go on to radio play and potentially become a huge hit. And he broke many records, which were then picked up by stations like WBLS and others around the US. And then, jumping over to Europe. And one of these really was Yoko Ono's Walking on Thin Ice, the quirkiest, poppy, alternative dance song that Larry embraced and championed from day one. And the crowd loved it. One night, he played Taana Gardner's When You Touch Me. I don't know how he did this. It was as if there was a train track around the room and the sound was going around the room like a train. It was the strangest and most beautiful sensation because the sound was traveling around the room.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor.
Next up, Lenny Fontana interviews Dave Shaw, who got the garage bug from Boston and moved to Manhattan to work for Warner Brothers. Dave gives us a younger generation view of Paradise.
Let's go to his story. Let's go to his story.
First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is David Shaw. I've held a couple of different positions in the industry. I was mostly known as a record promoter in the beginning. I worked for Warner Brothers Dance Contemporary Music Department. And I switched over to A&R in the 1980s worked for Warner Brothers Black Music, A&R, and then I switched to Columbia in 1989 and 90, and I worked there until 1994. Currently, I have a label called Continuous Music along with my partner Orlando Fasava, and I'm also Kathy Brown's manager. Lenny invited me to have a part in this discussion, and I have to say that I'm very honored that he asked me, because there are some people here have a very deep and long-standing tradition starting from the era of the Paradise Garage and the 70s and moving into today. There's a lot that could be said here, and there's a lot of information here for younger people who might have heard all these stories about the Paradise Garage, because people are always throwing stuff in your face like, well, back in the day. You really don't know what back in the day was if you weren't there. Probably one of the biggest questions that people have now, because in nowadays club scene, everything is very, very split into different niches, and each niche has its own population. You have all these different formats and varieties of what we now term as house music, which at the time of the Paradise Garage's heyday, it was all just looked at as dance music. And there was a couple of different factors that influenced that. One, you had, especially in the early 80s, after the so-called crash of disco, the music kind of moved more down-tempo on the R&B side, and it became more R&B friendly. It kind of moved down-tempo. It became a little less, high energy. It was more friendly towards black radio, right? And on the other side, the pop population kind of moved away from disco and kind of embraced what they called at the time punk rock. So one thing that is important to remember about the Paradise Garage in its heyday was that it was really a laboratory for diversity in music, and there was a lot of different styles of music that Larry played. There was a lot of different types of music. B-52s was played in there, right along with Ian Drury, and at the same time, Gwen Guthrie and Gladys Knight, and your traditional R&B artists who might have had a record that worked. It was like whatever the record was, if it worked for Larry, then it worked for the Garage. And by proxy, if the record worked at the Garage, then it spread into a whole network of garage-like clubs that existed in each major city in the United States. So if it was played in the Garage, it was likely played at the Loft in Boston, it was likely played at the Catacombs in Philly, it was likely played in Ron Hardy's club in Chicago and Frankie Knuckles' club, The Warehouse. And it was like an underground movement that sort of lived off all fed off the same energy. But the Garage was more or less, I won't say the centerpiece, but it was a place where everybody kind of looked to and different things came out of. Now, you might want to know what the crowd was like at that point. So getting back to what I was saying about how the crowd now is like all different niches. So when you go into a club, one type of club, you're only going to see one type of people, or maybe two types of people. The thing that made the Garage really special was that you saw all types of people. It was gay, it was white, it was black, it was Hispanic. Initially, the owner, Michael Brody, was looking to make it sort of like the Saint, a club for gay white men, but it just didn't work out that way. And it became, because it was an after-hours club, it became the club that everybody went to when they finished playing. So you had this huge population of DJs that would go there just to hear Larry play something new. You would get people from out of town who'd never been there who wanted to see what it was. You got people who came every week who were just average New Yorkers of all different walks of life. You would meet a person on the dance floor who would be losing their mind, and the next week you go into court and see that same person as a lawyer or even maybe the judge. There was always the possibility that you could find yourself dancing next to a celebrity on the dance floor. I myself saw Diana Ross there, I saw Madonna there, Grace Jones. There were a lot of people in the music business who would come there to either see it for the first time, be brought there by their promotion people, or there was a huge population of industry people who hung out there, both from the radio and the record side. And for some of us, a lot of us, it was a place where we would see each other, we would talk, we would hear our records, maybe not hear our records, but we would hear what was going on. And it was this, again, it was like this massive laboratory, a social laboratory. A place where a record like Lucky in Love by Mick Jagger could be a major record. Well, to this day, when it got played at the Paradise Garage reunion a couple of weeks ago, the reaction on the floor was huge. the crowd was probably 85% black, but here they were dancing to Mick Jagger. Now, Rolling Stones fans in the real world consider that one of their least favorite songs. In the garage, it was a monster hit. So the garage had a lot to do also with influencing radio in New York and the sound of radio in New York, because it influenced a lot of other clubs of its same type, and because it influenced the next level up, which was maybe the more commercial but still dance-oriented clubs. It became a place where radio programmers would go to hear what the next big thing was. Myself, when I first went, I was working on a college station in Connecticut called WRTC. And it was pretty much our business to jump on anything that was new and hot at the garage. Much to the consternation of the guy who was trying to program the black music station in our market, because he was trying to ignore all that music. So the bottom line was, we basically went there to hear music. A lot of people went there to hear music. I remember seeing Frankie Crocker there back when I, barely knew who Frankie Crocker was. A lot of your radio programmers used to go there from time to time, and just you taste what you listen to what people are into, because that crowd was very cutting edge, and it was a way of determining what might be your next big crossover record, because that crowd was some of everybody. So if they looked like they were getting into something, and it was maybe a record that wasn't quite down the mainstream, you could be pretty sure that it's possible that the record could actually cross over, because you'd be looking at a microcosm of New York City inside that building. As I said, gay, white, straight, lesbian, black, Hispanic, it didn't matter. Some of everybody was in there. So if that record was a smash overall in there, you could be pretty sure that in the real world, eventually it might also translate to that. Good example was Holiday by Madonna, right? I was there the first night Jelly Bean came in with that on the NASA tape, and the record took off right away with the garage crowd, and there you had it. You knew right away that this was going to be a big record for Madonna. A lesser known example might be Somebody Else's Guy by Jocelyn Brown. Okay, another record that blew up in the garage, started in the garage, and went all the full distance, almost all the way to pop crossover. Probably was Jocelyn Brown's biggest mainstream record. And the list goes on and on. I mean, Gwen Guthrie was a huge garage artist. She had a massive national hit with Ain't Nothing Going On But the Rent. By the time the people in Indiana were dancing to it, though, the rest of us in the garage were like, don't play that anymore. So it was people in New York, and people in the Paradise Garage was made up primarily of a lot of industry people, a lot of show business people who were in the performing arts, people who were in the cutting edge businesses of New York that made New York the city that never sleeps. And the mentality of that was that there was, the after hours club. It was a much different mentality than what you would find in the normal from 8 or 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. commercial clubs. Some of those records worked in the garage, some of them didn't. And some of those records worked outside of the garage, and some of them didn't. But a lot of what made the garage happen the way it happened was the diversity of people and the energy which was coming from so many different sources.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor.
A piece of paradise. Larry Levan story.
This interview is with DJ Freddie Turner from New York City. He's going to give you a feeling of what it was to be at the garage and experience the shows and everything that went on in the night. And let's go to his story.
Oh, I'm Freddie Turner. I went to the garage. It made me want to produce records, DJ. I worked in the fashion industry. Worked for some of the biggest designers in New York for years. And I produced Barbara Tucker, Stop Playing With My Mind. I've done a lot of records with Lenny. I did a lot of records with Frankie Feliciano. I did a record with Francois called Hypnodelic. I'm a DJ. I played all over the world. I'm from Detroit. We drove up here with this guy named Butch and my friend Derek Scott. And there were like 5 or 6 of us in the car. And it was packed in that car, and we came up here to go to the garage opening party, and they had sawdust on the floor. It was so intense. And this guy came with us, and he was like really straight-laced, like he was like, what do you call it, cheerleader. But he was really, really, really quiet and very, and I remember when we left that place, that boy had his underwear on his head. It was like, what happened to him there? What did he take? What happened to him?
Was it overwhelming for you coming up to the garage and seeing what you saw?
It was just such an education musically. For me, it was just the icing on the cake. when I got to the garage, because then you could sort through all the different styles of music. When you heard house music or disco and all of that, they had all the elements of jazz, R&B, rock. Everything was in those records, and you could identify them if you knew where all of those different kinds of styles came from. And Larry was that kind of DJ. He would play the Rolling Stones, Moody, play stuff like Eddie Grant. Like sometimes you hear people now and they say, oh, you can't use that in house music. You can't play that kind of instrument in house music. Why are they playing those pianos, or why they play the organ or whatever, or why they sing like this? And it's like, because house music is everything. If you really know how to play and you know how to put those things together, it can really be a tremendous feeling.
So you're saying that from your own perception of being at the garage, that there was no such thing as a genre?
It was just music. And you got your life in there, you really got your life.
But when you mean, I'd like you to clarify this for the audience, what do you mean life? You know, you have to realize something. There's a 19-year-old boy in England or Japan listening to this. Can you clarify that?
It was almost like you worked all week and you went there, and everything that was bottled up inside of you, he helped you release it. Everything that you wanted to be, you can express right in there on that dance floor. And nobody judged you. Nobody cared what you did in there. You'd just be on a high, a musical high. You really didn't need drugs to be in there. You didn't need any of that because you were on a musical high. It would get into your heart and move into your soul and up through your brain. And everything that's in you came out of you with that music. There could never be another garage, never. I've heard some places that try it, but they don't have the open mind like he did. He would, like I said, he would play anything if it was dope. And he made you like it.
Did you feel that it wasn't just a club anymore, it was more of a theater when the show began?
Gwen Guthrie was dope when she came there. She was sultry. When she sung, she was like, so vibey, that she would just capture you. And when you had Lolita, she was fire. Grace Jones came there, she gave you theatrics, and then she would give you that deep voice. She almost sung like a man, but she was just so fierce, you just had to check her out, Van McCoy did his last show there. He was like one of the first real disco people, Boy George, Rolling Stones, but the shows are really spectacular. Yeah, when you were standing on the line getting into the garage, he'd be playing that record. He'd play a record that you wanted to hear before you got in there, but thank God he'd play it again that night. Because you'd be angry. He didn't play my record, I'm on the line. Come on now. You didn't I was on my way. How dare you play my record, I'm on the line, I can't dance. And we'd be dancing on the line, waiting to get in there, because you could hear through those big fans, you could hear it. And every time I walk past that place, I always look inside. Every single time I walk past that place, I look up that ramp.
Why?
Because it's a memory that you'll never forget. Standing on that line to get in there.
You are listening to Legends of the Dance Floor, a piece of paradise.
This interview is with DJ Marcus Wyatt from Los Angeles. Let's check out his experience at the garage.
Oh, you don't know about the Paradise Garage? And he told us where it was. We went there that night, and nothing was ever the same. I mean, I'd never seen a crowd like that. I'd never seen that kind of diversity, and just everything, the system. I just will never forget the sound system. I just didn't even know one existed like that, or could sound like that. And just really the overall, energy of the place. And, I'm hearing about, after I was just like, you hear them, I'm going, Larry. And I was like, and I'm like, so who's this playing? They're like, yo, that's Larry Levan. And they're just always screaming Larry all night. And so I remember leaving there just, I'm like, I'm not the same, but go back to LA. And I start, I'm mail ordering records every week. Every penny I've got is going to mail ordering records. So, the guy, Curtis, he's like, okay, let me play this stuff for you. And I'm just taking it all. It's everything that I want, right? So after a while, he's around less and less. And he's like, I'm going to leave you in my boy's hands right here. And next thing I know, Curtis was never in anymore. So he's like, his guy, I can't remember the guy's name who took over. He's like, Curtis wanted me to send you his album. So I get it in the mail. And I had no idea all this time I was dealing with Curtis Mantronic. I mean, Mantronic was that Mantronics was my group, but they had been sending me singles with no picture on it. So when I got the album, I see Curtis on the album. And I'm like, all this time, I mean, he was like my man. You know, like Joey Sims, like just everything. No, Sarah, everything. You know what I mean? And I was like, okay, that's pretty serendipitous. And so from there, I frequented New York. It was just a thing. Like, and I remember going back every time there was a new spot happening. The next time I came out, Area was happening. And I remember going there, you know, that's in New York. You know, come from out there, it's just like, you know, they're picking people to go in. And I just remember like going to Area with my boy and we're like, okay, let's give it a shot. We get out of the taxi and the guy at the top of the stairs like, you too. We're in there. You know what I mean? It's just always been a flow with me in New York. A lot of serendipity, just the way everything happened.
A massive thank you to Danny Pucciarelli, Curtis Stevens. More thank yous to Foxy Diana Strafazi, John Eminem Morales, Senor Ramon Wells, Michael Paoletta, David Shaw, Freddie Turner, and Marcus Wyatt from Los Angeles. Tomorrow's A Piece of Paradise show marks Larry Levan's birthday, the 20th of July. And fittingly, Victor Rosado, Frankie Knuckles, Tanya Gardner, Judy Weinstein, and David Depino share with you up close and personal times that they had with Larry. Midnight GMT time on 6 Music.